a fresh set of eyes can really lend value. The key is being objective. The key is being inquisitive, and more than anything, trying to understand why in those situations. If you see something that from your vantage point doesn't make sense, try to, before saying, well, quit doing that, ask, what are you doing with it and why are you doing it? And make sure that you're not going to rock the boat in such a way that you're going to hurt the organization by making a flip decision, because it's something that you see that doesn't make sense. There, like anything, there's always multiple sides. Try to figure that out before you act. But when you do, then go ahead and use common sense. The other thing that I find is that you create a pace for the organization, and I'm a huge believer in energy, and the energy that the leader provides, people will feed off of that. And if you go slow, don't assume that your team's going to go faster than you. They're going to go at the pace that you set. So I very purposely kind of have that mindset that I want to set the pace and have the energy to do that.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Hart Hustle podcast. Now, today's an incredible episode because we're sitting across from an amazing leader. He is the epitome of heart and hustle. Now, he spent 30 years in the manufacturing industry and found himself with a golden opportunity to take advantage of being at the right place at the right time to become the president and CEO of Little Friends, Inc. Now, Little Friends, Inc. is an organization focused on empowering those with autism and other developmental disabilities and their families to live, learn, work, and thrive. I've got Mr. Mike Briggs across this digital table with me, man. Welcome to the show.
Well, Keenan, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to have an interchange. Should be fun.
This is going to be a blast. I'd like to ask the question to kind of get started, a level set. Now, work is out of bounds. How would Mike Briggs be described by the people closest to him?
Wow. It work in a lot of ways, in a lot of ways, it kind of defines what you do, especially when you've done it as long as I have. How would they describe me? I think that they would say that I'm a hardworking person. I think that they would say that I'm really passionate about what I do. They would probably say that I'm pretty tenacious in terms of my approach to trying to get something done. And there would probably be a few that would say that I really don't like to lose. That's probably something that started when I was a kid and probably never went away. I would hope that there would some that would say that, big picture, you'd like to be recognized as fair. You learn after running organizations for as long as I have that not everybody's going to love what you do, but they appreciate if you're honest and you explain why, and that you're fair and explain those kinds of things. So I would hope that that would be also that maybe somebody might sneak that in during the conversation if a bunch of people answered the question.
One of the things that I love about you is you talked about how, and this is, you have a competitive nature, and I'm saying this with all due respect, but you really failed one time at an early retirement, and it kind of brought us to where we are here today. I want to give the audience a little bit of flavor about that journey that you were on that kind of led you to where you're at here.
So I'll tell a little bit of background. So I ran manufacturing companies for 30 years, and the last manufacturing company that I ran was located down in Central Texas. It was a great company, and I really enjoyed the experience. But it was just outside of Austin, Texas, and my wife and I had made the decision because we had 7 grandchildren, and they were all up in the Illinois area, that it would be really hard for her to take that out of her life and follow me down. And so, having traveled most of my life, I assumed that I would just go ahead and just come back and forth. You hear about other people doing it, and I thought, well, I've spent enough time on the road; it's no big deal, and I'll just work. And then when it's time to come home, I'll come home on the weekends. What ended up happening was that became harder than what I thought. And in particular, what what I learned and grew to value were the connections that were outside of work, and in particular, my wife, my children, my grandchildren, my friends. Those are all things that really mattered to me. And when you're alone, and all you're doing is working, it's one thing that you can get a lot done, but at the same time, it's not a blast. And so what ended up happening was I retired early. I was 58 at the time, and I just thought, well, the kids are just going to have less in their inheritance fund because I'm just going to go ahead and retire, which I did. And when you're used to doing a whole lot of things and being in the middle of 400 to 500 emails and all these things, and you're solving all these problems, and then you go cold turkey, it's an interesting dilemma. And I found myself in the summer. I was good because we talked about a common like for playing golf. I could play golf in the summer and do all those things, but in the winter it was rough, and I found myself kind of pacing back and forth. And after I would go work out in the morning, the afternoons were brutal. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I got to figure this out because, I felt if it was on ESPN, I could certainly talk about statistics and things like that. Or if it was in the Wall Street Journal, I'd read every article that was there. But Keenan, it wasn't much of a life. And all of a sudden, I was on the board of directors, and it wasn't planned, but there was a need for a leadership change. And one of the individuals on the board said, you're not doing anything. Why don't you do this? And originally when I was asked that question, I said that I would, but I would do it only on a temporary basis. And I didn't really understand the magnitude of what I was being asked to do, but I thought, well, this will just give me something to do. Now, that's really originally what I thought. And I would be doing some good, and I would help keep the place afloat, that kind of thing. What ended up happening was I began to immerse myself, and I realized how much was needed. I realized that the skills that I could bring to the dance, I could apply everything that I'd learned in running for-profit businesses in a nonprofit social service organization, and that there was really a need for this. And so all of a sudden, I found a niche where I knew what I could help with, and it became also somewhat painfully apparent is that we were in more trouble than we knew. And so it became a challenge to do a turnaround. And so the combination of all those things became something where I said, I'm not going to do this on a temporary basis. I'm going to do this full time. And then it began to feed my own energies, but also the opportunity to begin to help other people and know that your work was something that really made an impact on the people that you serve and the families, and in some ways parental as you look to protect your employees. And when all that was said and done, Keenan, I've been blessed to have the opportunity now to say that I'm in the middle of my 8th year with an original plan to retire in 2 years, and I've already extended that now to where I'm going to go to at least 4.5 more. So I feel really, really lucky.
This is an interesting thing that a lot of people who are listening and watching the podcast can relate to. My father tried to also retire at the age of like 46, and he found himself stir crazy because you can only play golf so many times. You can only watch,
Yeah.
these movies and these series so many times. And there's a really cool quote that I came across the other day, and I want your perspective on this. It said, "The scariest experience is obtaining the life that you thought would make you happy, but not feeling what like you hoped it would." How many times are we willing to make that mistake, Mike?
Wow. Um, I think the thing that's really interesting about that quote, and I'd not heard it, is when you feel that way, and then you relive it, and then you relive it again, and when you're used to doing problem solving, you ask yourself, "What did I do?" And how am I gonna fix this? Even when I got into going back to work, I didn't know that that was going to fix it. But what I did know is that I loved the process. I loved the interaction. I fed off of that. I fed off the challenges that represented. And for me personally, all of a sudden I found myself in a bizarre way feeling needed. And I think that's one of the biggest things that retirees struggle with is they go from being in a position where they're needed completely to not needed at all. And that's such a void that all of us who go through that have to figure out what's important and what's not.
A huge part of our ability to keep showing up and pouring passion into the things that we do is being a part of something bigger than ourselves. And often I feel like that's a really healthy piece of our identity, especially when we're used to applying ourselves to challenges and, like you said, falling in love with the journey, which I think is so beautiful. There was something that you mentioned in part of this earlier conversation, which was you saw an opportunity for there to be a niche where a leader can lead the organization and incredibly talented people in the social services space can do what they do best. Why do you think that's such an opportunity in this space today?
So, there's an old time management theory about you invert the organization and you work for everyone else, and I've always kind of bought into that mindset. Um, and the way I look at it is first, okay, have I eliminated all of the obstacles so that our people have the greatest opportunity to be successful at their job? Maybe just frame that. And so if you begin to look at whatever the role is and whatever the job is, have we made the job easier? Have we made people more effective? Have we taken away the things that cause them discomfort and frustration and all those things? And what can we do from a process standpoint to help things? And so you apply those things that you might in a for-profit segment or a manufacturing environment. Same principles, same things. If you do that, what's really interesting is it applies in social service too. And so what I would say is, and how it can work is that if you start to look at the things that create lack of productivity or waste, or stuff that non-value added activities, and you help people get rid of those things and you make their job easier so that they have more time to do the things that they're really most passionate about, you make the organization better. And to me, those same things apply from a practice standpoint. Those same things apply whether it's social service or for profit.
There's a really interesting concept. I was having a conversation with my mentor, and she said, Keenan, you need to rethink your job as a leader of your organization. And often we think CEO, but you need to think about yourself as a chief constraint officer. Consistently evaluate and monitor the things that are stopping your team from doing what they do best and eliminate those obstacles. What do you think that about that chief constraint officer idea?
You can call it whatever you want, but I think the same thing that I just said about eliminating the obstacles that cause people the inability to be effective, be efficient, be happy. All of those things, especially if they are processes or programs that are within your control that you can do, eliminate those things, and you'll be surprised how much better employees will feel. I'll tell you an example. Just in one of my first couple of weeks there, I was at one of our homes, and I was getting a tour, and they were showing me where they captured all the information, and they put all of this information that they were monitoring a child for their activities, and they had to keep track of if they did anything that remotely looked like dysregulated behavior, and then they had to put a check mark on it. And they had to do that every 15 minutes. And they didn't always have the sheet of paper, so they'd have to kind of do it from memory. Then they would take that and then they would throw it into a binder. Now they were doing it every 15 minutes. And I said to the young lady who was showing me this, I said, that's pretty cool. I said, so how do you analyze this? She said, oh, we don't look at it. I said, well, why you do it then? She said, well, we were told to. I said, guess what? I said, you stop today. I said, unless anybody's going to look at it and there's value in what you're doing, we're going to stop. And it was a huge hassle that they had. And I know for some of the old managers who embraced that idea, they thought it was a good thing, but they weren't doing anything with it. They weren't analyzing it. They weren't turning it into data that drove behavior after the next day. So why do it? And so to me, that's kind of the principle of eliminating non-value added activities and how you can make a change that makes a difference in how somebody does their job.
There's an amazing benefit to being an outsider because you have fresh perspective. People are often too close to it. And one thing I would love to bring up is something that popped into my head. There was an experiment where there were a whole bunch of scientists and they put four monkeys in a cage. And every single time they would put bananas in the cage, they would allow for the monkeys to climb up and grab a banana. The second time that they did it, when a monkey went up, they would douse all of the monkeys with cold water. The third time they put bananas in the cage, they doused the monkeys with cold water. The fourth time, they monkeys went up to go grab the bananas. The other monkeys started stopping them from doing this activity, grabbing the bananas. And then they replaced one of the monkeys in the actual cage with a new monkey. The new monkey went up to go grab the bananas, and the other monkeys tore it down and stopped it from doing it. The analogy behind this experiment was often we do things as you continue to replace out the team members, and these traditions get passed along, and we have no idea why we do these things other than the excuse, this is what we do here. But there's no attachment to the value add or the actual reason why we do a certain behavior. It's really interesting to think about how we're conditioned to do things, and an outsider has a different perspective that can make all the difference.
You're spot on with the story because a fresh set of eyes can really lend value. The key is being objective. The key is being inquisitive and more than anything, trying to understand why in those situations. If you see something that from your vantage point doesn't make sense, try to, before saying, well, quit doing that, ask, what are you doing with it and why are you doing it? And make sure that you're not going to rock the boat in such a way that you're going to hurt the organization by making a flip decision because it's something that you see that doesn't make sense. There, like anything, there's always multiple sides. Try to figure that out before you act. But when you do, then go ahead and use common sense.
I think there's a real advantage to you coming from the manufacturing space and now working in the social services element. So as we talk about a little bit in this space, 1 in 36 children today are being diagnosed with autism and other disabilities, meaning there is a huge demand in our communities for services and responses from organizations like yours. How are you kind of thinking about the challenge that organizations like yours are facing when it comes to meeting the demand in the community compared to other people who have been in this space for quite some time?
So there's a couple things I think that I would share with you as to how we're approaching it. When I started doing this, 7.5 years ago, the number of children that were being diagnosed, the ratio was 1 in 89, and then it dropped, I don't know, 1 in 60 something, then 1 in 50, and then 40 something, and now 36. It became very clear that we were in, if you want to call it, a growing business. And so the thing that struck me was you need scale to make an impact on your work, but you also need scale to be able to lever overhead and spread overhead across multiple things. And so what we agreed was that we needed to get bigger to put ourselves into position so that our work mattered and we couldn't be easily replaced. And that protected the people that we serve. It protected their families and gave them peace of mind knowing that we were going to be around. And it protected our employees to make sure that they were going to have a paycheck and didn't have to wonder whether or not we'd be able to do that. And so as we talked about what was necessary for us to be able to be in that position, we chose the path of building infrastructure that enables us to help more people. And so over the past several years, we've been on a journey to make incremental gains, and in some ways we've made large gains, but to be able to build the organization so that we not only could grow from within, but also expand into new markets and expand into tertiary areas that complemented the work that we did, so we could lever our internal strengths without putting ourselves in a position where if we got into something, we were doing it blind and we were going to fail. No different than what you do in a for-profit business when you're looking at new markets and new products and services and things like that. We just applied that methodology to how are we going to grow our organization. And so we've more than doubled in terms of what our annual budget is. We've added additional resources. We've added services. We've done a couple small tuck-ins. We're assuming everything goes well. It looks like we'll have more likelihood that we'll add another business to the fold and another program, by the end of the coming year. So we're doing those kinds of things to position ourselves to be able to serve more people. Bottom line is, even with those being served and the number of folks, there's still a whole latent demand out there where a lot of people that are at home, that parents are still caring for individuals, that they're not even getting services and they need services. And so it's scary when you really look at what the need is and the resources that are out there. We're just trying to make sure we're on the leading edge of getting bigger and trying to do more in terms of support for the people that we serve.
Being on the leading edge often means that we have to have a culture in our organization that is not afraid to fail. And I think failing forward is an incredibly healthy cultural element for organizations that do amazing things. I was listening to a keynote by Jeff Bezos yesterday, and he was talking about the huge failure that they had tied to the Fire phone. So they tried to compete, I'm not sure if people recognize this, with Apple and Google and everybody else who produce phones by producing their own. And he said that was a $690 million experiment that we ran to see what we could do in producing a device. Now, one of the things that we have here at Amazon is a culture of experimentation and failing forward. What are some of the benefits of a $690 million failure? Alexa and the Kindle, which have been two of our leading products that we've been able to leverage out of that experiment. I want to kind of ask your leadership perspective on nurturing a culture of experimentation versus making decisions. Decisions and moving in a direction can seem very scary and high stakes, but running experiments creates freedom and opportunity for failure that can be rewarded. What do you think about that?
I think it depends upon the organization as to what you can do. I don't know that this is the right formula, but it's kind of how I look at stuff. Is that I try to work with our team and create consensus on the goals and objectives that we're going to accomplish, and some of them are, if you will, global in terms of the corporate overall organizational stuff, and then some of them are very, very specific to the departments. And the goal states to do what, the objective answers the question how much by when. Big picture. What I try to do then is one of our values is treat people the way you want to be treated, and if it were me and if I worked for me, I would want the ability to figure out how to accomplish that goal. And I would say, what do I need? And I would look for support, and I'd have an interactive dialogue, and it's part of our communication process. But here's where the opportunity for failure occurs. If someone comes to me and says, this is my plan, this is what I want to do, go do it. Now, what are your benchmarks? How are you going to know whether you're working? I mean, I believe in failing fast, failing cheap, but that doesn't mean failing fast, failing cheap means you're learning and you're adapting, and you have to take that approach. Okay, that didn't work. So given that, what's next? And so, the road is never absolutely straight. Anybody who says that is kind of crazy. But the idea is to learn from it, move, and just try to keep it between the white lines that enables the organization to still be sustainable. We've taken some risks, and we've done some stuff, and sometimes it's worked really well, and sometimes it's been slower to take root than what we thought. But if you believe in what you're doing, then it's kind of like the old sports analogy. If you keep running an end run and you get stopped at every time you get to the line of scrimmage, maybe you ought to think about running a different play. And you kind of learn that playing sports, And when we talked before, we said we were going to do this. There's so much for sports that aligns itself with business, and you got to look at it as a game. You got to look at it as a period of time, and you got to say, okay, that didn't work, so you adapt. And that's part of how it I think it works and should work in a business, social service or for profit.
Navigating that winding road can sometimes be challenging. In our previous conversation, you said as you're navigating the landscape of business, there's a real difference between great managers and great leaders. Leaders have an ability to emotionally connect individuals to their environment and to the work that they do. Let's kind of riff on that topic because I thought that was really amazing from your 2 cents.
Oh, well, thank you. I really believe that. I think through emotional connection um, creates, if you will, inspiration. And in the end, it becomes the why you do what you do. Um, Money's great, and money will drive you, but if it doesn't feed something else, if there isn't an emotional connection to what you do, it's hard to stay with it on a long-term basis. But if you get emotionally connected and you're financially rewarded and you have other things that you see, man, that's like the more than a trifecta. That's like hitting a bonanza of all sorts of things that you try to do. But emotional connection and feeling a part and feeling needed and wanted and recognized, all of those things that get bundled up, it's part of a leader's job to acknowledge and recognize the work that people do and the accomplishments. If you're really, really smart, you make sure you get out of the way so that all the accolades for the good things go to the people that do the heavy lifting, and that you're in the way taking all the bullets in case something didn't work. And to say, okay, here's how, you regroup behind me. I'm just going to go ahead and take all the shrapnel. And that's a great way to create loyalty from your workforce because they know you've got them protected. And that's a big deal.
Now, when we talk about emotion, right, a lot of people think that emotion equals softness. It equals a lack of accountability. In our previous conversation, you mentioned a term called compassionate accountability. Kind of riff on that a little bit.
So, I think the challenge is to try to get um, a way where you can communicate with people in an honest way when you're talking about whatever the situation may be, um, to make sure that you're able to disassociate the human from the behavior, and then say, okay, where are we on this? Are you doing this? How can I help you? Why are we not doing it? This is really important. Are we on the same page? How can I help you? All of those things, that accountability, those questions uh, can be awkward, especially if somebody hasn't achieved what they need to. But if you ask the questions in a way where you say, okay, what is it? Am I not providing what you need? What is it that you need that we missed? And be a part of that. There's a compassion there that says, I'm trying to help you solve a problem, and but I'm also holding you accountable for the results because I'm not backing off what's there. Um, and it's kind of how you move an organization forward. At least my take. You have situations where sometimes you make major gains, and sometimes it's very minor, incremental. But you identify those things that are the challenges, and by asking about, are you doing what you said you were going to do, and if not, what are we going to do to get there? Give them the chance to sell, give them the chance to fix it, and if they need help, provide support. And I think that's compassion, but I also think that that's good management because you're making sure that somebody knows exactly what they're supposed to do.
I have a little bit of a personal question for you. Now, one of the things that I recognize about being a nonprofit CEO is we have immense levels of burnout in these spaces. Okay. One of the bigger challenges that I think we have to recognize is appreciating all of the wins along the way. When we're talking about combating some rising issues of diagnosis and the demand for our community, these can seem like daunting challenges. Now, one of the things that I know is goals are a destination, a finish line, or an event. But when we get them wrong, they often turn into a horizon. We take a step towards it and it moves one step further away. How have you been able to stay grounded in the work that you do to appreciate how far you've come in pushing this organization forward without having the end goal be a horizon that keeps kind of creeping away on you?
Well, that's an interesting question because I'm not so sure I've done that well. Um, and I think from an organizational standpoint, I think we've actually, as a management team, even had some conversations recently to say we have to figure out how to improve our interaction with our employees that give us the opportunity to celebrate accomplishments better than we do now. And I'm acknowledging that as we continue to push and try to do these things, you don't always have the systems in place to provide the interaction and the feedback, and so you never stop to celebrate. We have windows of time where we have a board meeting and we get to tell our story. We have an annual meeting where we summarize what we accomplished over the year, big picture, and make everybody feel good in those things. But it's more of an ongoing process that I think I'm acknowledging we can do better. It's a challenge. Um, you can sometimes get burnt out. I'm not gonna say to you that you don't have windows of time where you get burnt out, but you need to kind of back away and make sure you understand why you're doing what you're doing, and you need to help those that are feeling that make sure that they get those windows of time to rejuvenate and say, why are you doing what you're doing? And then get into, hey, look at what you accomplished. Now, I've your comment in about, what you've accomplished and everything like that. I'm maybe I'm old school, but I'm choosing not to keep score until I'm done. And that's just how I feel. I want to keep driving and I want to keep doing things and making things better. In the end, I'll look back and say, okay, did I make things better than what they were when I got here? And if you can say yes to that, that's great. If you want to all of a sudden do a tally, that's great too. But more than likely, you're not going to remember all those things. You just know that you made the organization better, and you can feel good about that. I think that's one thing that anybody that comes to any organization should have as their objective: is that did my presence count? And did I feel like I made a difference? And oftentimes, if you can be told that you're doing that and you can feel that you're doing that, you're going to like where you're at. You're going to stay where you're at. I mean, there are a lot of incredible benefits that come with being able to answer that question in an affirmative way.
One of the concepts that I've tried to become better at myself, to give myself more air cover, if you will, to accomplish my goals, is to think on longer time horizons. The quickest way for me to lose 10 pounds in the next 10 days is dramatically different from how I would lose 10 pounds over the next year. Thinking about how we can extend our time horizons, I feel like is a really important lesson in business, because the only objective, especially when we're doing amazing work like you guys are, is to keep playing this game. Do you think maybe subconsciously you've adopted that idea of you're not going to tally the score until the end because it alleviates a little bit of pressure that you might put on yourself?
No, and I'll tell you why. So I'm old. Okay, I'm 67, and when I started this, I just turned 60, and my thought process was I had enough energy, so I thought to give a minimum of 5 years, a maximum of 10, and there was an incredible lesson, Keenan, that I got by putting a time frame on how long I was going to be in the job, because I had never done that in anything I'd ever done. I'd always looked at it like I'm just going to be there and I'll figure it out and we'll navigate and kind of go. What it created was a sense of urgency to solve the things that I saw and knew that needed to be done. And it was probably one of the greatest management lessons. In fact, I would tell you that you know, if some of the people that, I don't know who's watching, but if some of the people that worked for me years ago thought, well, maybe I was slow to the draw because I was trying to feel my way through it. And this time around, I said, no, we don't have time to do this because A, I don't have time. And we need to fix what's going on. And having a sense of urgency was one of the most significant management lessons that I learned literally from the fourth company that I ran. And I thought to myself, God, I wish I'd have known this and been able to apply it in a way where I thought that it had impact. So no, that's not it. The other part is just me um, being superstitious. I when you're an old jock and you do well, you don't, you know, you don't keep track. You try not to keep track of what the scorecard is or whatever that is. You just keep playing. You may wear the same things each game, but you just keep playing because you don't want to jinx yourself. And I've just kind of learned the minute you become braggadocious about something is the minute bad things happen. And call it superstition, just call it observation. But it's also when you feel like, oh, you've accomplished something and you let your guard down, then something bad happens. So I think to that extent, you gotta have a little bit of an edge to where you feel that, and then you push yourself, and you can keep track when you're done. And then maybe I will. I don't know that I will, but maybe I will. Maybe someone else will.
Are you familiar with Parkinson's law?
I've heard it, but tell me what it is again.
So Parkinson's law says that a task will take the amount of time that it is allotted. So if I say I'm going to do something over the next week, it's going to take a week. If I say I'm going to do something over the next 2 days, it's going to take 2 days to get done. And that in itself is a way for us to frame that sense of urgency to get things done. Because if we give ourselves a certain amount of time, if it's 3, 5 years, we move with a sense of urgency that maybe that longer time horizon doesn't benefit towards.
When you asked me the very first question, how would people describe it? I probably should have said impatient. Another fair adjective to describe, because that is probably a lesson from what I've learned related to the importance of having a sense of urgency to get something done. And it's really interesting when you approach your work that way. Get it done. Figure out how to get it done. And the other thing that I find is that you create a pace for the organization. And I'm a huge believer in energy, and the energy that the leader provides. People will feed off of that. And if you go slow, don't assume that your team's going to go faster than you. They're going to go at the pace that you set. So I very purposely um, kind of have that mindset that I want to set the pace and have the energy to do that.
I completely agree with that. I think, your team shows up as you do. I had the fortune of sitting across from an executive team earlier in the week, and I met the CEO through, a connection. And this guy is a bang up individual, and he's grown his organization from 5 million to 50 million in the last 6 years. And one of the things that he said was, I set the tone for my team and I let them know how we get things done by establishing expectations. When I got on the call with the team, they said, we've already done all the prep work. We've looked at the materials that you've sent over to us. Don't you know that Will is our CEO? And they said, if you know anything about Will, we're a reflection of him. And that was one of the first times I've heard an entire executive team vocally say, we are a reflection of our CEO. And I love how you said you set the tone for your team, because it couldn't be more true.
It is. And in the beginning, there was change, and not everybody said, I want to ride the bus that way. And there were some folks that said, I can't do this, and got off. But the people now understand where we're headed and what we're trying to do, and the support's awesome, and their engagement is awesome.
I want to deviate a little bit from our framework that we kind of talked about here. So one of the things I recognize is what got us here is not going to get us there. So how are you kind of thinking about items like technology and innovation to help you kind of meet the needs of the community for information and access to services and things? Maybe like even artificial intelligence. How are you thinking about that stuff, Mike?
Uh, uh, all the time. And technology is a huge part of what we do. Innovation is a way for operational performance, efficiencies. There are some incredible tools that are coming with AI with regard to how we provide documentation on clinical support and being able to say some things and being able to have it be transcribed where it's legit and works. There's some really, really cool technology. I admit to being a novice, even though we do stuff and are using AI and don't even know it. At the same time, there's just still so much to learn. In the meeting that I talked about today, there's a subcommittee that's being formed, and one of the things that was a takeaway for me is that I need to create a subcommittee within our organization that does nothing other than comes back and says, here's how we're going to use AI, and let some people do some deep dives into it that will touch them and do that. On the technology side, we were almost solely paper based to, almost everything is digitized now. The kids didn't have technology every child has one-to-one technology. All the teachers have stuff. All of our curriculum is all cloud-based. Every major program we have is cloud-based. And before it was either on a server or running on Excel, and there was no interaction, and things didn't mesh together. We're trying to figure out how can we get better information that drives behavior. And so what we're really looking at is not that it's a new concept, but implementing data warehousing and pulling data from different systems to be able to answer different questions about our performance and the outcomes that we generate for the people we care for and the families and things like that, as well as customer sat stuff. Technology is a big thing right now that's going into homes and is a way to be able to provide oversight to individuals who can be independent but still need access just in case. And so there are some tools that you can put in place that can give somebody access to a screen, and there's somebody on the other end that can say, hey, what's wrong? What can I do? Can I help you? And it gives them that peace of mind to know that they're okay and they're not alone. Sensors on doors or sensors on rugs that if somebody gets out of bed, you know that they're there without putting cameras in places that are inappropriate and not the thing to do. All those things are all stuff that's, in play and things that we're looking at or doing or have explored and we'll continue to explore. Technology is a big part of, quite honestly, how we've been able to lower the number of fixed, or I should say full-time employees. While we doubled the size of the organization, we have less employees than what we had 8 years ago. And a lot of that is because we eliminated waste, and technology is the reason why.
Mike, I get super excited when I sit across this digital table with leaders like you who demonstrate a healthy sense of curiosity. Because one thing I know is healthcare in general has always thought that we could do the same things over and over again and get different results. And we have to have a healthy sense of curiosity to get us to where we're going.
There's absolutely no doubt. And the reality is that one of the biggest things in our world it's such a problem is that the people that we care for often have multiple doctors and clinicians and specialists that quite honestly, they don't communicate with one another. And so you've got information about an individual that's scattered all over and it's not shared. And when you start looking at what's efficient and effective, and you start looking at the drivers of healthcare costs, the sharing of that information is really critical to eliminating redundant tests and stuff that maybe they could quickly solve something if they knew that somebody else had done something, but they don't do it. Whole person care is a big phrase that's in our world. And figuring out how to do that and do that right. There are some that have got the right framework, but it is a real challenge, especially with the population of those that we focus on as an organization.
You change the incentives, you change the outcome. And when we think about these massive EHRs and EMR systems that are all siloed and compartmentalized, they don't have the incentives to conjoin and integrate, or I would say integrate or interoperate their data, which is a huge problem that stops us from getting to results quicker. That's something that, we continue to see in the healthcare space from an innovation perspective. And I hope there's a day that we can get that interoperability done.
Well, there's a conversation that's been going on for probably, I'm going to guess, 10 years about value-based care and eliminating expenses, and then if you eliminate expenses, sharing the rewards with those who are able to help eliminate the expense by getting performance bonuses by doing things right. Um, it's while it's out there, it's still not in mass implementation, but it's a real thing, and it's if you just look at healthcare in terms of what's going on in the world, I mean, it can't continue on the trajectory that it's on. There has to be some change because costs are escalating to the point where at some point businesses are going to go, well, I just can't afford to do this, and then what? Then does it become the responsibility and the role of the government to do that? And where's the cost going to come from that? It's just it's a that's a really big question, but it's a challenge, and that's something that we have to be really aware of.
Mike, you started leading organizations when you were 28 years old. If you could go back to the 28-year-old Mike and give him a piece of advice for the next upcoming years of his career, what would you say to him?
Oh my gosh. Um, I I would say um, I always stayed true to my values, and I'm so glad I did, about how to treat people with respect and dignity and be fair, and that I believe that that was the right thing to do. And I would say keep doing that. I would have said keep working hard, probably work harder, have a sense of urgency. Don't be patient if you see something that doesn't make any sense. That would have been a huge lesson that I would have learned. Keenan, I had the blessing of my first 5 years of work was with IBM data processing, and it was the most incredible training back then that anybody could have had. And it was the foundation that got me into so many different things. I applied what I learned and how I was managed. And they did a lot of things right, and it was a great thing to emulate. And so, from that standpoint, that was a great thing. Um, I probably I took risks, but I didn't understand about fail fast and fail cheap. Because I was so young, I was afraid of what would happen if I failed. So I probably wasn't as bold. And I knew that there were some things on the horizon in the first company that I was in where the products were becoming obsolete. I should have been bolder, but I was a little bit older at that stage. Maybe the other thing was, truth be known, uh, it was a family business, and one of the greatest lessons I learned was to remember humility related to minority and majority shareholders. And you can be right, but if you're the minority shareholder, make sure you're careful as to how you say something. That was a good lesson to learn as a kid.
Our one of our traditions as we end the podcast here is a previous guest, Mike, wants to ask you a blind question. And their question was, what does courage look like from your seat as the CEO?
Gosh, what does courage look like? Um, the conviction and the willingness to do what you think is right when others um, others are emotionally are swayed to think otherwise. But if you really strongly believe that this is the right thing to do for an organization, and you're willing to stand behind it, to me, not that that happens a lot, but sometimes it does. And to have the courage to say, I'm willing to take the risk, and if it doesn't work, it's on me. And I appreciate your feedback, but here's where I am, and this is why. And sometimes that's unnerving. That takes courage to say, okay, I really believe this is the case. But it takes some smarts to go. If it's not working, change, adapt. Don't be so stubborn that you put yourself and the organization in harm's way. So there's I guess a second part to that, but that's what came to mind when I thought about the question. I think the maybe the other thing on the human side is the courage to know that the work that you're doing is helping so many people, and to continue to push to find resources, even though sometimes people say, well, we can't do more, and have the courage to say, well, we got to figure out how to do more because people need what we do. And so uh, I, I, I push for that. I don't know if it's courage. Maybe it's just believing and knowing what's important and knowing the impact of our work for families and why we do what we do.
You, sir, are the definition of heart and hustle. And I want to say for everybody who's tuning in, watching, and listening today, Mike Briggs, thanks for coming on the show, man. That's a wrap.